So let me take you back to February of 2015. I just got out of college and I was starting my first job for a company out in New Jersey where I lived as a solar sales consultant. I was failing, you guys. That is how I felt at the time. I was failing. I had been there for a few weeks, and to talk about my experience during that, our company had started off, they had been doing solar for about 2 to 3 years, solar sales and installs before I got there. But I was one of their first door-to-door reps that they hired. I was their third training class for door-to-door. So they didn't know much, and I was the only female they had ever hired for sales. So when I left my training, after that first week, they handed me a men's XL polo, because it's all they had, and they said, "We will get you a women's polo once we start bringing on a few more girls and we can buy them in bulk." So I went through a 5-day classroom training with this company. They weren't sure how to train door-to-door reps, so I learned everything there was to know about solar sales, install process, our CRM, all the kind of back-end stuff you don't need on your first day. Then I left that 5-day classroom training and I went to an office where there was 7 people. The manager was a pest control manager that they recruited over that had never sold a solar account. And he said, "I'm happy to manage a team for you, but I will not knock any doors." So I was very alone. I didn't have any support. I didn't have a good example. I really just had myself. And that was really scary for me. I'd never done a sales job. Again, I was fresh out of college. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I am here today standing in front of you, call it crazy, call it tenacious, but because I was willing to stick through that first little while until I had success. And a lot of people don't get that chance, right? A lot of people quit before that happens. Thankfully, I eventually figured my stuff out. 5 weeks in, I got my first sale. I ended up getting rid of $40,000 of student debt within my first year in sales, got my first car, got my first apartment, and I was doing well. Now, standing in front of you today, I've consulted many businesses. I've gotten into consulting and leadership and women's coaching, and my story is not unique. I know hundreds of people that have a story exactly the same as mine, and they're not happening almost 10 years ago the way mine was. They're happening right now. So if you have a retention problem in your company, it is industry-wide, and I'm here to tell you guys that that does not have to be the case. We treat sales rep retention like it is a numbers game in solar, and that is not how we should be looking at it. There are lots of systems, lots of ways that we can put things into place in order to support. Now, I would say everyone in this room has at least one of these 4 main objectives they're working on this year. Number 1 might be to attract more talent. So maybe you're trying to scale out your team, grow into a new market, start up a new revenue stream. Another might be attracting better talent. So you've got a good foundation, but now you want to be able to recruit a VP of sales from another company because you have a good foundation. Maybe you're trying to get into vertical integration. So you're an EPC taking on a direct sales force, or you are in sales and you're trying to become an installer. Or 4 would be you're getting into mergers and acquisitions this year. All 4 of those main objectives require that we objectively start to look at our businesses as needing sustained competitive advantages. And culture is actually one of the best ways to have a sustained competitive advantage against other companies in our space because it is very hard to imitate. It is rare, it is valuable, and it is hard to imitate if you have a great culture. And culture really comes down to your retention and your performance systems and how you attract people into your business that share a similar vision to you. So now that I've been in the industry, I own a successful consulting company, I'm CEO. I've now co-founded a women's community, the Pride. I'm super, super passionate about helping less people have a story that I did when they get started, especially the women. That is a big one for me. We are still about 90 to 95% male dominated within our industry. And that I'm going to talk about for a little bit today, why that is important and how we can start to make a conscious shift. So today I'm going to talk to you about why culture matters, why women matter to your business model and your culture, and then how we can start to make that shift. So culture is kind of a tricky thing to talk about and build systems around, because it can be hard for someone to say, I know exactly what my ROI is on this new training system that I'm putting together. But what I would urge you guys to do is tie that into sales rep performance, employee performance. In fact, there is a stat, there's a couple years ago, someone called Alex Edmonds, a researcher, did 28 years of stock market data analytics and found that companies with high employee satisfaction ratings, good culture ratings, they were outperforming their peers at about 3% per year, which led to over 100% outperformance in that 28-year period. So that is how much employee satisfaction and building systems around these people truly should matter for you. So I want to talk you through a system that I use as kind of the foundation when I'm consulting companies and helping them build out the right culture that's going to make sense for them and be truly authentic. And it is called the performance matrix. So culture is not something you are, it is something you do. It is a set of living, active relationships that compile over time. So if you have people on your team that do not embody the character traits that you need in order to have success long term, then you are building on a rickety foundation. So I'm going to talk through setting up a really strong foundation for your team that then you can start adding in those systems on top of. So I want to first look at this as kind of the history of sales and how we got into the way the industry is today. Go backwards to the 80s when Wolf of Wall Street was kind of the norm for our culture in sales. It was completely male dominated. The only women in the offices would be assistants or admins, and those guys were selling, lights out, because at the time you could sell a customer and still have maybe some of those aggressive or territorial kind of behaviors, and it was fine. It kind of matched with what they were looking for at the time. Looking at this matrix, I've got kind of these two axes here, and we'll go through the different quadrants. But the top is high performance. So these are the character traits that someone can exhibit on your team to perform at a really high level and empower those around them. The low performance traits obviously do the opposite. Part of culture is you're always an addition or a subtraction, but you are never neutral to a team. Then I've got a masculine side and a feminine side. But because there's some preconceived notions here between those two things, I don't want to tell anyone that's not going to, receive this properly to get into your feminine side. So we're going to call them your passion traits and your power traits. In the 80s, this was what was accepted. People were doing the healthy masculinity kinds of things here, right? Taking action, being decisive, logical thinking, analytical thinking, all of that led to better sales. But because everyone kind of had some of maybe the same strengths and weaknesses, everyone was okay setting the standard that if you showed up to work and you were a little bit unemotional and not able to support your colleagues and territorial over someone that maybe called one of your leads the night before, or a little aggressive with other people on your team, then that was okay. And I am here to set the record straight and make sure we're all on the same page. The Wolf of Wall Street era of sales is officially over. So fast forward to today, what does it take to be a top performer in an organization? Obviously both in sales, but outside of sales as well. We are now moving into an era that cares more about emotional intelligence, empathy, creating strong relationships, and being really authentic. And so this is where we are moving. And I hope you guys can kind of see how women fit in very strongly to this. If you are hiring strong, competent women to join your team, then you are going to get a lot of these character traits that might not be present in an all-male culture. Now, there's also a stat that says there's a tipping point on that. So it's not just bringing on one girl, but there's a tipping point for it before everything really starts to fall into place. Now, I've had men ask me in the past, hey, Alex, I hired a girl one time. I love what you're talking about. I hired this girl. She was okay for a couple weeks, and suddenly everything started to fall apart. She was acting like a victim. She was directionless. She was having all these issues with the guys in the office, and it caused this just general feeling, and I needed to get rid of her. So I'm nervous to hire another female into my sales team. And my answer to that is it is not because she's a woman, it is because you hired a low-performing person. You see how that stuff shows up on that side? that's not just a feminine thing, right? We have a lot of men in the industry that might act a victim and make excuses for their low performance all the time. So that is what happens in that type of circumstance. It is not because it's a woman. And, granted, all women are not created equally. There are some that are going to come into your business and already be exhibiting a lot of these high-performing traits, and that's what you want to screen for during your recruiting process. But you can also develop a lot of this in people. So I'm going to talk through how to do that in a second as well. Using this as a tool within your organization is super, super effective. So don't just take this and say, cool, I've got this nice little grid I can take away from this presentation. Use it as an actual tool. I have sat with companies and decided, how are we going to screen for specific traits during the interview process? If you do a really good job following this performance matrix and seeing how you can embody it with your team, then you're going to start screening for better people earlier on in the process. The people you bring onto your team will not be these lower performers, or if you do bring someone on board, hopefully the culture that you're starting to foster has a higher standard set. So when someone comes into the team and they're a little territorial, someone's gonna talk to that person, pull them aside, and say, hey, we don't do that here. We're a more open culture. We're here to support each other, and we're gonna snuff that stuff right out. Now, I'm sure you can see how obviously women pulling into this makes a ton of sense, but why specifically do we want to bring women into our culture? And I want to go back to those 4 main objectives I talked about in the very beginning. Number 1, growing your team, attracting more talent. 2 is attracting better talent. 3, vertical integration, or 4, mergers and acquisitions. There's a couple main things that would be useful in any of those circumstances. And if you think about it, we're no longer contained as an industry, you guys. We have investors and capital and partnerships coming from outside of our industry. And when they look in and they see a boys club of people that are not really setting a higher standard for how they should act together as a team, they may not be willing to invest in a business like that because they just don't understand. So it's important to objectively kind of approach this stuff that way. Now, bringing women on, there's a lot of studies that kind of show some great stats here. One of them is a McKinsey study done in 2022 that looked at companies that had women as part of their executive leadership team. And companies that had more executive females on their team were able to perform 48% better than less diverse firms in the exact same industries. Now, the tipping point there is a 30% split. That team needed to have at least 30% women on it in order to truly make things happen. I can't see you guys super well, but can I get a raise of hands if you have over 30% of your leadership team is female? I know my click people in the front. Okay, not a ton. Cool, so we all have some work to do in this area that we can definitely capitalize on from this talk. That's great. So number 1 is financial performance. Obviously, women were outperforming, that stat had to do with the specific financial performance of firms. So firms were doing 48% better revenue generation, and a better bottom line because of the women on their team. The second stat was around employee and customer satisfaction. So because generally, when women were a part of the decision-making process at companies, and you had these strong, competent female leaders, they were also contributing to better structure for teams. They were contributing to more empathy, more crucial conversations that needed to be had with the team, and they were able to feel through relationships a lot better than some of their male peers. And so because of that, firms that had strong female leadership had significantly better employee and customer satisfaction. And the third thing was they helped firms outperform when it came to ethics. There were less lawsuits and less reputational scandals with the teams that had 30% or more women on them. And that's massive, you guys, because we're in an era of solar where we're pretty unregulated right now, but the things that are going to cause severe regulation sooner rather than later are having issues with ethics in our companies. And so if you can do little things like hire the right people on your team to help curb that stuff ahead of time, you are going to be able to stand out against your competition. Now, what can you do to attract these high-level women onto your team so that you have these people to start, building with and scaling alongside? Number 1 would be to foster the culture of high performance that I have right here. Be capable and willing to evolve. So if you are having people that are exhibiting a bunch of these low-performing traits on either side of the fence, You're having conversations with those people, and you're stopping the tolerance of those traits. You're quickly weeding them out of your culture so that you have a better foundation to build upon. Second is to build a culture around structure, support, and security, especially for your new hires. I obviously started this talk off talking about retention as well, right? And retention is a massive issue in our industry when it comes to our sales teams. But a lot of that can be fixed if they come in and they feel like they know that they're going to get support moving into training. Most people show up to a company and they don't have a training agenda. That person doesn't know what they're doing. I've made this mistake before, so I mention it, but maybe they're showing up to their first day in a suit and tie because you didn't tell them the dress code, right? There's a lot of things that maybe we're missing to support our new hires that help keep them engaged long term, and women especially need safety and security and support coming into an organization. There's a lot of data around the fact that men and women prioritize completely different things when it comes to what they want in a new job, and women prefer those things, while men might prefer more riskier jobs that are willing to be commission only, and work outside and have a little bit more risk kind of involved. So that's where you need to bring on more women as well. The third thing would be to empower the hell out of the women that you have right now. There's not a ton of information and training out there on how to be a really, really great manager, but something that you should be very focused on with your time if you're leading teams is how can you develop the people underneath of you? And that is gonna be a little bit different per person, right? But it starts with you truly, truly caring. Now, if you are a male trying to lead females and you do not have other women in your organization to turn to for mentorship, we have every single woman in this room, I bet you guys, would be willing to help you out because of how collaborative they are. We're a small force in the industry right now, and the beautiful thing about that is we're also collaborative, we know each other, we support each other, and so if you brought on a new girl and you needed to call one of your friends from another business that's a woman to get some help and ask a couple questions, I promise you she would be willing to do that. Now, next is how do we start to facilitate this shift? We've got all of these different components kind of coming in, and how do you take this performance matrix and bring it back to your team? Someone's having fun out there. The good news is the best time to make a massive change with your team is right after an event because they're expecting you to come home and have ideas and have new things that you want to implement. So the good news is you are already setting up the stage for one of your first meetings with your team to be about something like this when you get back. I would tie it into your goals, right? So let me kind of role play as what I would say if I was a manager talking to a sales office. And again, this kind of starts with leadership. So the first step would be to come home, give out this talk, put this performance matrix up on a slide, and talk to your team about it. And the way I would frame it is, obviously we've got this goal this year, guys, to expand into 2 new markets. In order to do that, I want to make sure that I bring home some of the stuff that I was learning at SolarCon this weekend. Now, I learned a little bit about this performance matrix and how to build a culture of high performance by really making sure we're fostering these high performing traits in every single person on the team and making sure that we're setting a standard that we're not going to tolerate people exhibiting these lower performing traits because everyone is an addition or a subtraction to their culture. You are never neutral. So I'd have that conversation with the team. I'd talk through this. I'd tell them, we want to make sure people are looking kind of in this direction. So I'll follow up with you guys on this in one-on-ones, but I hope I get your permission to give you strong, warm feedback when it comes to this sort of thing if I feel like you're getting off kilter. And I hope you guys feel comfortable holding each other accountable as well, because that's how teams bond. So I would set the stage that way. Then I would pull your leaders in. This might be your top performers, this might be your mentors, kind of that next level beneath of you. And I would pull them in after that meeting, and I would ask them their feedback on your training and get their opinion. They want to know that you care about what they think, right? So ask them their opinion, let them know you want to start working on this in the office, and ask their ideas. How can we kind of make this happen? So get some ideas running with the people that have influence underneath of you on your team, and then ask them specifically to help you out with this. Everybody wants to help out leading their team, bringing more cohesion, right? So ask them for their help to move in this direction. Once you have them on board, the way I would work on this is follow up in your one-on-ones. So if you're doing one-on-ones monthly, which I hope you're at least doing them monthly, please start if you are not. Then I would go into that one-on-one, and let's say you were talking to someone that was maybe a little bit, showing some low performance traits, making a lot of excuses, not being a good addition to the team. I would go through your normal one-on-one stuff, and I would ask, hey, what did you think about the performance matrix training we did, the other day? Get their feedback on it, and my favorite way, you guys, to give people feedback when it's an uncomfortable situation, because a lot of times if you're uncomfortable, you might not even lean into giving feedback, which as a manager, that is your responsibility. I would just say to them, hey, my intention is to help out. Is it okay if I give you some feedback? And everyone's gonna say, yeah, of course, what's up? So you get that opportunity then to tell them, hey, I noticed that one of the new guys was knocking in your hood by accident. They crossed into a street the other day. You guys ran into each other and you blew up on him. And I would love if you could turn that attitude around, because that is not what's going to be supportive to our new hires. I'm sure it was an honest mistake, and if you want to talk to him about it, talk to him about it, but we have to make sure we're supporting each other here. And then see how they handle that behavior change. They may lean into it and do a great job, and they may not, but you guys also then have to be willing to cut out the fat on your teams. If someone is not going to shape up, you've got to get them out. I am so excited to be giving this talk and wrapping up now for you guys today, because I think we're on the right direction in solar. We have a long way to go when it comes to culture and how we can support our businesses and each other, but we are certainly starting off on the right foot. Change starts with us. Thanks.